Did Etsy really just remove 3.4 million stores? And is Etsy really actually saturated? Because if it is, that means your store cannot do as well as it should be doing. In this video, I'm going to show you some alarming statistics that you are not going to want to miss. What's up, everybody? Dave here. So, very important question, is Etsy too saturated? It's one of the most common questions asked by existing sellers and new sellers wanting to start on Etsy.com. Now, there are millions and millions of Etsy stores. I will say that. But there's some new data that I want to share with you from these articles that I will also share with you that will kind of blow your mind and also make you wonder, did Etsy itself make some silent killer moves in the darkness that didn't really get as much press as I see on Etsy YouTube? Before we get started, if you would like help with your Etsy store and want hands-on mentorship, book a free call in the description below. We'll talk about how I can help you, where your store is at, and if it is helpable. Also, grab the free Etsy Ads cheat sheet in the description below. I just updated it to include the new Etsy ad strategies. All right, so where are we at with Etsy saturation? If there's too many sellers, then you're not going to be able to do well. So it's always asked, it's for good reason too, but sometimes the wrong reason. This is what I want to bring up first and foremost. A lot of people asked, at least existing sellers asked this question, is Etsy too saturated, for the wrong reasons. It's oftentimes to justify a dip in sales. If they experience a dip in sales, then they start trying to point the blame towards other factors. Oh, Etsy is too saturated. Oh, the economy, all these kinds of things. Now, there are macroeconomics that can affect a store. For example, if you're in Europe and you mostly ship to US, right now, September 8th, 2025, the shipping situation is kind of crazy, which I think they'll be figuring out very soon because there's billions of dollars on the line. That's for another video. But there are macroeconomics involved. However, most times people ask these questions because they're not doing well in their Etsy store. They don't know how to fix it, or there's a problem with their products. Their products are just simply not that great, which is possible. People have varying levels of talent. Some products aren't as good as others. Some products are much more unique than others, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes people do ask, is Etsy too saturated, for the wrong reasons? But that's not what I'm here for. That's not what we're talking about today. I want to share this interesting data with you, and it's over here, that from 2023 to 2024, there was a drop of 3.4 million active Etsy stores, which is kind of crazy. Was that from Etsy removing either inactive or violating policy type stores? Was that Etsy cleaning house? I would hope so. That'd be awesome. I can't imagine 3.4 million stores deciding to leave Etsy all at once. I can imagine that was from discrepancies in, maybe this store was logged in a country that Etsy doesn't allow, but it's saying its location is here, and a bunch of other oversights. I imagine there's a portion of that, Etsy removing those sellers, and then there's a portion of Etsy removing sellers that are blatantly breaking rules. I still to this day see Etsy drop shipping resources on the internet for blatant drop shipping, the type that is not allowed. I'm not talking about print on demand. I'm talking about the kind that is not allowed, blatant reselling, which is against Etsy's reselling policies. So I imagine a large portion of this, decrease was from Etsy removing stores, but also this metric here is active stores. So that means a lot of people stopped selling. And that could be, a lot of the pandemic boom stores, the pandemic era boom in stores, which, by the way, during the pandemic in 2020, 300,000 new stores per month were added to Etsy.com. Can you imagine that? I remember it being a huge boom in sales, but if there were 300,000 stores added each month, I imagine a lot of, buyers were added those months as well, because people had stimmy checks as well as people not having anything to do. And if you remember, Etsy was one of the first websites to sell masks, to be allowed to sell masks. And a ton of different people made cloth masks, and, people made a lot of money. There's an old video on my channel. It might be private now, but I found a store that did 46K in one day from masks, period. And it appeared as if it was drop shipping. It did not look like a genuine store. However, I digress. There are a lot of decrease in sellers from 2023 to 2024. Now, when the 2025 data comes out, we'll obviously reevaluate that and see if we've increased or decreased. However, I did want to point out that there was a large and sharp decline in sellers. So is Etsy too saturated? Millions of stores, that's pretty saturated, yeah. However, you can still do really well, and I'll touch on that towards the end of this video because there's a lot to say on that topic as well. The next thing I want to bring up is that right now there are 89 million active buyers, okay? So while 9 million to 5.6 million decrease in active sellers doesn't sound like a whole lot, it means a lot more that there are 89 million active buyers. So there is a lot of the piece of the pie to go around for Etsy sellers. And it's kind of crazy to think about because Etsy is still growing as a marketplace. I still encounter people in my everyday life where I ask, do you know what Etsy is? Or they ask what I do. And, I'll say, do you know what Etsy is? Some people still say no. Some people don't know what Etsy is, but they do know what Amazon is. And Etsy is, continuously seeking to get a portion of the market share of online, e-commerce. So Etsy's still even growing and buyers will increase. I didn't look up the amount of buyers for this video, but I can imagine Amazon has a much, much larger buyer count. And until that that gap starts to close a little bit, we have a lot of room to grow. So 89 million buyers is a lot. So keep that in mind when you're asking yourself, is Etsy too saturated? Because you can always, at least for now, do great on Etsy.com. Why? Because the algorithm is always moving around. It's always changing. Things always, kings and queens of Etsy, they get dethroned. People drop off, all kinds of things happen. And the algorithm does give you chances as a new store. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, get this here. This is important. Otherwise, Etsy would simply be a seniority contest, which it isn't. I'm sure you've used research tools before and have seen brand new stores, a year old, 6 months old, doing very impressive sales numbers. So it's very possible for new stores to do amazing. You can always pierce through the algorithm with the right picture, with the right titles and the right tags and the right products, being in the right place at the right time. You can always pierce through and do well. So no, Etsy is not too saturated. Did Etsy remove a ton of stores? We don't know. It appears as such, but there are 89 million buyers to compensate for that vast number of sellers. Now keep this in mind. This is another very, very important statistic that these two articles listed. Again, links in the description for these two articles. But only 29% of shops are full-time. That's not a whole lot. That's not all, 5.6 million. That's 29% of those shops. Some of them are just seeing what's happening. And then here's another interesting statistic that it brought up is that 91% of stores on Etsy are under 5,000 orders per month. Now, that metric honestly is largely redundant unless you're like a digital seller or something, because many stores, even with 90 sales per month, certain high ticket items, even with 90 to 100 to 200 orders per month can be making serious money, high ticket items. But a lot of full-time sellers that make a great multiple six figures are anywhere from 1,000 to 4,500 orders per month. Above 5,000 orders per month, you're likely talking about the top 1% of the top 1%. And that's few and far between. Obviously, it's 9% to be exact. So is Etsy too saturated? No, not at all. You can still grow. And if you would like to grow, definitely check out the free Etsy mentorship calls in the description below. We will talk about how to grow your store If you want to also grab the free Etsy ads cheat sheet in the description below, goes over everything you need to know to get started on Etsy ads and to have a clear mind and a good head on your shoulders for navigating Etsy ads. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope you have a beautiful day.